Good day, teacher. Our topic is about Section 2, Obligations with a Period, from Article 1193 to Article 1198. Article 1193. Obligations for whose fulfillment a day certain has been fixed shall be demandable only when that day comes. Obligations with a resolutory period take effect at once but terminate upon arrival of the day certain. A day certain is understood to be that which must necessarily come, although it may not be known when. If the uncertainty consists in whether the day will come or not, the obligation is conditional and it shall be regulated by the rules of the preceding section. So, obviously, the Article 1193 talks about obligation with a period. Before discussing what is obligation with a period, we will discuss first the meaning of the word period. So the word period is a certain length of time which determines the effectivity or extinguishment of obligations. Again, the word period is future and certain event. On the other hand, if condition, future and uncertain event. So, this article also defines day certain. Accordingly, a day certain means the day which necessarily comes, although it may not be known when. Meaning, the word day certain is the day nga sigurado nga moabot og mahitabo bagamat wala ta kahibaw kanos a mahitabo. In contrast, kung naay condition, wala ta kahibaw kung mahitabo ba or dili. Obligations with a period. Obligations for whose fulfillment a day certain has been fixed shall be demandable only when that day comes. So example of this is X promises to give his particular laptop to Y on December 30, 2020. So sa example, naghatag og nagpakita ni og exact day kung kanus a mahitabo ang gipromise ni X nga laptop adto ni Y, which is on December 30, 2020. Next is condition versus term or period. First, condition. A condition refers to an event, while term or period refers to an interval of time. So, ang condition kuno ay tumutukoy sa usa ka panghitabo, while ang term or period kay tumutukoy sa pagitan ng oras. A condition has for its requisites futurity and uncertainty, while term or period has for its requisites futurity and uncertainty. A condition may or may not happen or mahitabo or pwede di pud mahitabo, while term or period will surely come to pass although it may not be known when. So ang term or period mahitabo siya although wa ta kay mangno kung kanus a mahitabo. A condition exerts an influence upon the existence of the obligation itself, while term or period exerts an influence only upon its demandability. A condition has retroactive effects while term or period has not have retroactive effects unless there is an agreement to the contrary. When a condition is left exclusively to the will of the debtor, the very validity of the obligation is affected, while in term or period, when the duration of a term or period is left exclusively to the will of the debtor, the obligation is still valid. A condition must be passible, otherwise the obligation is void, while a term or period must be passible, otherwise the obligation is void. So in short, ang condition is an uncertain event and may or may not happen or mahitabo or dili mahitabo. While on the other hand, ang term or period is an event which must happen sooner or later at a date known beforehand or a time which cannot be determined. So there are kinds of period or term. It is classified according to first, effect. A. Suspensive period. Obligations for whose fulfillment a day certain has been fixed shall be demandable only when that day comes. So, suspensive period when it suspends the demandability of an obligation upon the arrival of that period. Example, X promised to give 10,000 pesos to Y on February 14, 2020. Take note that X will be liable upon demand by Y on February 14. Diba? It suspends the effectivity. Sa example, ang giingon sa February pa ihatag ang 10,000 kang Y. Gi-suspend up to February 14, 2020. B. Resolutory period. Obligations with a resolutory period take effect at once but terminate upon arrival of the day certain. So, it is a resolutory period if the performance must be terminated or extinguishment upon the arrival of the period. Example, X promised to give 100 a day to Y until May 30, 2020. Let it be noted that the obligation of X is immediately demandable. However, X's liability to Y will be extinguished on May 30, 2020. Number 2 is expression. So A is express. When the period is specifically stated, and B is implied when the period is not specifically stated, but it can be deduced that the parties intended a period, just like when the debtor binds himself to pay when his means permit him to do so. Number 3. Definiteness. Definite period when there is a fixed date or time, while the indefinite period when there is no fixed date or time. So ang definite period is kung ang date or ang time is fixed, while ang indefinite period, ang date or ang time dili fixed. Next is as to source. A. Conventional. When the period is agreed upon the parties. So, sang-ayon ang party sa period. B. Legal. When the period is fixed by the law. Meaning, ang period is fixed by the law. C. Judicial. When the period is fixed by the courts. Meaning, ang period is fixed by the court. So, requisites of a period para makonsider nato nga period siya. First, it must refer to the future. Second, it must be certain. And third, it must be possible. So, next is Article 1194. In case of loss, deterioration, or improvement of the thing before the arrival of the day certain, the rules in Article 1189 shall be observed. So this article still talks about loss, deterioration, or improvement before pa moabot or mahitabo ang period nga nasabutan. And according to Article 1194, the rules in Article 1188 shall also be observed. Unsa man daay pod naa aning Article 1189. So ang Article 1189 will apply to whoever has the duty to return in case of loss, deterioration, or improvement of the thing. Example: Laura gave Dave a parcel of land on condition that Dave will pass the CPA exam on October this year. So naay condition nga nahitabo nga if makapasar si Dave sa exam, mahatagan si jag land. Pero if dili si ja makapasar, wala pud si jay land nga madawat. So ingana ang Article 1189 nga makita pud nato sa Article 1194. Article 1195. Anything paid or delivered before the arrival of the period, the obligor being unaware of the period or believing that the obligation has become due and demandable, may be recovered with the fruits and interests. So, ang Article 1195 discusses the effects of payment or delivery before the arrival of the period. Other words of saying this article is that what if the debtor has paid before the arrival of the period? So according to 1195, the debtor may recover if he has paid, including for the fruits and interest, if he is unaware of the period. So example: on January 30, 2020, X obtained a loan from Y in the amount of 100,000 due on December 30, 2020. Subsequently, both forgot the maturity date of the obligation and X paid it on October 30, 2020. So sa kaning nga case, ma-recover ni X ang 100,000 pesos nga naipon ng mga legal na interest, which is 12% per annum.
Effects of payment in advance. The debtor can recover what he has paid or delivered with the fruits and interest. However, he cannot recover if he delivers the thing voluntarily or with the knowledge of the period or term, or the fact that the obligation has not yet become due and demandable.
In other words, the debtor can still recover the thing if he or she is unaware of the period or mistakenly thought that the obligation has become due and demandable. However, he cannot recover the thing once the period has arrived.
Article 116. Whenever in an obligation a period is designated, it is presumed to have been established for the benefit of both the creditor and the debtor, unless from the tenor of the same or other circumstances it should appear that the period has been established in favor of one or of the other.
In this provision, it determines the benefit of a period in an obligation. The presumption is that it is for the benefit of both the creditor and the debtor. The effect of this provision is that the creditor must not demand payment before the agreed period, and the debtor must not demand to accept the payment before the agreed period. The general rule. The period is presumed to have been established for the benefit of both the creditor and the debtor. Example: on January 1, 2020, X promised to pay Y 100,000 on July 1, 2020 with an interest of 1.5% per month. Said period is for the benefit of both the debtor and the creditor because X can invest the money to obtain profit, while Y can earn more interest income during the 6 months period. Exception: if the period has been established in favor of the debtor or of the creditor. Note that the Article 1196 states that the benefit is both of creditor and the debtor, unless there are circumstances that appear to be established in favor of one or of the other. Example: X promised to pay Y the amount of 100,000 pesos on or before July 1, 2020. In this case, X has the option to pay his obligation on July 1, 2018 or even earlier, but Y cannot demand before said date. Hence, he must have to wait for the July 1, 2020 because the period is for the benefit of X, the debtor. On January 1, 1985, V. Incorporated, represented by its president, Dr. J. AGDX Corporation, represented by H., its president, entered into a consultancy agreement by virtue of which the former obligated itself to render medical services to the employees of X Corporation. The said service contract stipulated, among others, that this agreement takes effect on January 1, 1985 up to December 31, 1985, provided, however, that either party who desires to terminate the contract may serve the other party a written notice at least 30 days in advance. On December 16, 1985, Dr. J. wrote H., president of X Corporation, to inform that she was assuming from their silence that subject agreement was renewed for the succeeding period from January 1, 1986 to December 31, 1986. In her reply letter dated December 23, 1985, H. notified Dr. J. of the termination of contract in question upon its expiration on December 13, 1985, but such letter reply was formally and actually received by V. Incorporated only on January 9, 1986. In the complaint filed on January 15, 1986, V Incorporated averred that X Corporation's sudden and unexpected termination of the consultancy agreement, which requires a written notice 30 days in advance, did not conform therewith. Is the 1985 consultancy agreement deemed renewed for another term? The second clause of the contractual provision in dispute is to the effect that written notice of termination should be served at least 30 days in advance. As a rule, the method of terminating a contract is primarily determined by the stipulation of the parties. Thus, the requirements of contracts as to notice, as to the time of giving, form, and manner of service thereof, must be strictly observed because, in an obligation where a period is designated, it is presumed to have been established for the benefit of both the contracting partners. Thus, the unilateral termination of the contract in question by X Corporation is violative of the principle of mutuality of contracts ordained in Article 1308 of the New Civil Code.
Period has been established in favor of the debtor. It means that the debtor cannot be compelled to perform the obligation prematurely, but he can do so if he desires.
It means that it's up to the debtor whether he will perform his or her obligation on or before the agreed period.
Period has been established in favor of the creditor. It means that the creditor may demand the fulfillment of the obligation at any time, but the debtor cannot compel him to accept payment before the expiration of period.
means that the creditor may demand the fulfillment of the obligation at any time, may it be before or on the agreed period, and the debtor cannot force him or her to accept payment.
Article 1197. If the obligation does not fix a period, but from its nature and the circumstances it can be inferred that a period was intended, the courts may fix the duration thereof. Courts shall also fix the duration of the period when it depends upon the will of the debtor. In every case, the courts shall determine such period as may under the circumstances have been probably contemplated by the parties. Once fixed by the courts, the period cannot be changed by them.
General rule: the court is not authorized to fix a period. However, there are exceptions. First is, if the obligation does not fix a period, but from its nature and circumstances it can be inferred that a period was intended. We may seek help from the court to fix a period. Second is if the period depends upon the will of the debtor. Third is if under the circumstances the parties have contemplated a period. Last is when the debtor binds himself to pay when his means permit him to do so. For example, sometime in 1939, the late Y, who was then a member of the Board of Trustees of the ex-university, executed a deed of donation in favor of the latter of a parcel of land for which transfer certificate of title number T12345 was issued in the name of the donee ex-university with the following annotations copied from the deed of donation. 1. The land described shall be utilized by the ex-university exclusively for the establishment and use of a medical college with all its buildings as part of the curriculum. 2. The said school shall not sell, transfer, or convey to any third party, nor in any way encumber said land. 3. The said land shall be called Y Campus, and the said school shall be under obligation to erect a cornerstone bearing that name. On 31 May 1989, the heirs of Y filed an action for annulment of donation, reconveyance against ex-university, alleging that since 1939 up to the time the action was filed, the latter had not complied with the conditions of the donation. May the court still fix a period in the case at bar? The first exception states that if the obligation does not fix a period, but from its nature and circumstances it can be inferred that a period was intended, cannot be applied considering the different set of circumstances existing in the instant case. More than a reasonable period of 50 years has already been allowed for ex-university to avail of the opportunity to comply with the condition, even if it be burdensome, to make the donation in its favor forever valid. But unfortunately, it failed to do so. Hence, there is no more need to fix the duration of a term of the obligation when such procedure would be a mere technicality and formality, and would serve no purpose than to delay or lead to an unnecessary and expensive multiplication of suits.
Article 118. The debitor shall lose every right to make use of the period. Number 1. After the obligation has been contracted, he becomes insolvent unless he give a guarantee or security for the debt. Number 2. When he does not furnish to the creditor the guarantees or securities which he has promised. Number 3. When by his own act he has impaired said guarantees or securities after their establishment, and when through a fortuitous event they disappear unless he immediately gives new ones equally satisfactory. Number 4. When the debtor violates any undertaking in consideration of which the creditor agreed to the period. Number 5. When the debtor attempts to abscond. Based on the 5 cases that we mentioned sa Article 1198, the debtor shall lose every right to make use of the period, meaning the period is discarded and the obligation becomes demandable at once or immediately demandable. This is actually based on the fact that the debtor may not be applied with his obligation. So this is the example of number 1. In the contract of loan agreed upon on July 1, 2020, X the debtor and Y the creditor agree that X will pay his obligation in the amount of 100,000 on December 31, 2020. Further, they agree that Y cannot demand payment earlier than December 31, 2020. Subsequently, on September 1, 2020, X turned insolvent. In the case, Y need not to wait for December 30, 2020. Y can immediately demand the obligation as an exemption. However, X can offer a guarantor or pledge or mortgage as security for the debt. Number 2, example. In a contract of loan agreed upon on July 1, 2020, X the debtor and Y the creditor agree that X will pay his obligation in the amount of 100,000 on December 31, 2020. As additional stipulation, X also promised to deliver his only car as pledge or security on August 1, 2020. Further, they agree that Y cannot demand payment earlier than December 31, 2029. On August 1, 2020, X failed to deliver the car which is the object of pledge. Hence, obligation become immediately demandable. This means that Y need not wait on December 31, 2020 before he can make a demand. Number 3, example. In a contract of loan agreed upon on July 1, 2020, X the debtor and Y the creditor agreed that X will pay his obligation in the amount of 100,000 on December 31, 2020. In order for Y to grant the said loan of X, the latter mortgaged his only house as a security. However, on October 1, 2020, said house was totally destroyed by earthquake. Consequently, the obligation of X becomes immediately demandable, and Y need not wait for December 31, 2020 unless X will give a new security which is satisfactory to Y. For instance, a land to be continued again as a real estate mortgage on favor of Y. Number 4. On October 1, 2020, X asked Y for the latter to lead 10,000 to the former to be paid on December 31, 2020. Y told X that he can lead the said amount provided that X will no longer smoke cigarette until December 31, 2020. Otherwise, the obligation become immediately demandable. X agree to the said undertaking. If on November 1, 2020, X was caught smoking cigarette, then his obligation become immediately demandable. Number 5. Attempt to escape means attempt to escape. This is a sign of bad faith because the debtor intends to evade his obligation.